welcome to the Charts podcast. In this episode, we are thrilled to have Daan Remarque with us. He's a behavioral psychologist with more than 20 years of experience as a brand and communication strategy consultant for many national and international brands, both in the private and public sector. He's the author of Het Jojo Effect, a book about changing your own behavior, and also a self-proclaimed climate optimist for the financial newspaper FD. Daan investigates the question how to win the mass for climate action. A big question. Today, we'll discuss how should we communicate the energy transition when there are so many other serious issues that we also want to address. So welcome, Daan, to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Fridrik. It's an honor to be here.
Honor for us to have you. So we have some questions lined up for you, and which we will be going through. And if something pops up, we will address it, when it comes up. So my first question to you: what drives you to pursue the question how to win the masses for climate action?
Yeah, a great question. As a communication specialist, an advertising man, so to say, I've always had to seduce audiences that were, by default, generally not interested in what my clients had to say or sell. So the challenge in advertising is always, how do you seduce people who are not interested? And this always starts with empathy, a deep understanding how the audience thinks and feels about what you're selling. So when I see the energy transition, I look at it as an advertising man, basically, and I think it needs to be sold as well, right? We need to seduce people who are basically not interested to embrace it. And I think only with empathy, with truly understanding, putting yourself in other people's shoes, you can connect with the other and tell your story in such a way that it is seductive, that they feel it will help them achieve their goals. Your question was, why is how to win the masses for climate action my central question? And the reason is actually very simple. If we want to accelerate and scale up the transition, we need to win the large majority, right? And as we live in a democracy, we cannot force them. They should want it. So they need to be seduced. And I had the feeling this wasn't happening, that the dominant narratives about climate and energy transition were not seductive enough, not appealing to the mainstream audience. So that's the reason that next to my work, which I still do, I'm in brand and communication strategy consultancy, I started to write in the leading financial newspaper in the Netherlands, which is called Financiële Dagblad. So it's not Financial Times, it is the Dutch Financial Times, so to speak. And maybe it's good to clarify one thing. I decided to call myself a climate optimist. And this does not mean I'm optimistic about the state of our climate. I mean, I'm not stupid or naive, but I am optimistic about climate action. I believe that we are capable to do what's needed to stop global warming. We have the technology, and it's still improving every day. We are doing it, and we're making great progress. And I think that is a story that's not told nearly often enough or well enough.
Mm-hmm. No, good points. Thanks. A really good answer. But if I may just probe onto one thing you said, that you felt like we're not using empathy, or you're not empathetic enough, and we're not using the seduction techniques, and we might not be all the time doing the right things. Do you see a trend in what we might be doing wrong in this regard?
Yeah, I think we will come to that later in this podcast. But I think one of the things that's happening is actually that we are repeating the arguments that convinced the first group to embrace climate action. So the arguments that appeal to that first group, to the group with a, let's say, a green belief system, for them, all the doom and gloom about the climate, that spurred them into action. And so they started doing things, and they started sacrificing things. They started to do away with their car, to stop flying, to eat less meat, to recycle, to buy less, and to turn the temperature in the room down and wear a big sweater. And what we are now doing is repeating those same arguments to the wider audience. And I think the wider audience has a completely different belief system. So to them, the doom and gloom is not motivating. It is depressing. It's turning them away from climate action. So that's, I think, the problem that we have a small group that's really all fired up about climate action, and we have a larger group that is not really fired up about climate action. They think it is somehow connected with sacrifice and with solutions that are really a leftist agenda. Most people are not really on the green left side of the political spectrum. So that was why I put that central question: how can we win the masses? The first group we have won, the green group, they're all for it, and they have stepped into action. But now we have to convince the rest. Because if we want to accelerate it, the masses have to vote for climate action.
But on that doom and gloom, so my next question, so negative news, they tend to sell. So, and you write for a financial newspaper, so you understand what makes the headlines, basically, I would assume. But today, the Middle East is a very tense situation. Russia and Ukraine still at war, and social issues such as immigration, rising cost of living, all dominate the headlines. How, as communicators and PR professionals, should we communicate the energy transition in the press and media? A big question, of course, but
a great question, good question indeed, Fridrik. And one answer, I think, that the energy transition is actually connected to most of the issues you mentioned. To, I mean, energy security and Russia and Ukraine is really connected, right? We want to be more independent of dictators with gas and oil, and also cost of living is also connected to the energy question. But I think you and many of the listeners of this podcast know everything what's going on in energy, and it's a very dynamic world, right? Things are moving fast. But one thing I discovered is that many people think the energy transition is actually going nowhere. All the headlines give them the impression that things are not working. So they have no idea of what's really happening, how fast things are changing, because steady progress in the background, which is what's happening all across the world, never makes headlines. Journalists say, when it bleeds, it leads. So steady good news never makes headlines. Negative news sells. So media mostly report what's not working in the transition. So they tell us more about climate doom, which gives you the impression that the climate is just the global warming is just going on. We're not doing anything about it. There's congestion on the energy grid. There's policy conflicts. There are angry protesters. There are transition pains, and these dominate the news. Have you heard of constructive journalism? This is a concept proposed by Ulrich Hagerup, if I pronounce his name correctly. He's an ex-journalist, and he now heads the Constructive Journalism Institute. And what he does, he's actually fighting the negative news bias. He says we need more constructive journalism if we want people to stop from disengaging and avoiding climate news altogether. So I just discovered this concept, and actually I realized that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to be constructive instead of always going for clicks with gloom and doom and conflict. And there's some interesting research from the Institute that shows that constructive news about the climate gets 50% more clicks than the usual negative news about the climate. So there's actually a benefit to constructive coverage. So what I do, I share factual highlights of how fast the transition is really going, how fast clean tech is developing, and highlighting the amazing progress that's being made in clean technology. And readers are positively surprised. They say, I didn't know that. I thought there was nothing happening. And what then happens is interesting, because if there's not only urgency, but also agency, we can do something about it, then it starts to inspire them. And they see it as let's say, the moonshot of our age, which I think is the right way to see it. I think the energy transition is maybe the most difficult thing that humanity has ever done in such a short period of time. And it should be exciting, and we should all be psyched about it and not only worry about it.
No, very refreshing attitude, I must say. But just to follow up, on the previous question and some of the comments that you made in regards to that question. So more explicitly, what is your opinion on telling positive stories and projects versus communicating the risk of not acting? So what's the balance there to your mind?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So actually, this is about agency and urgency, I think. And I was at a very interesting hybrid event in Brussels the other day. I think there were about 100 people in the meeting room in Brussels, and there were thousands of people following it online. So that was why it's called a hybrid event. It was organized by Vattenfall. And the central question was, can climate communication overcome the bad news problem? And Ulrich Hagerup was there. And another member of the panel was Chris de Meijer. He's the director of the UCL's Climate Action Unit, University College of London, one of the top 10 universities of the world. They have a climate action unit, which he's heading. And what he says, he's a neuroscientist, is very interesting. He says that about climate change, people have enough urgency, but not enough agency. So this is frustrating, right? They do believe there's a big problem that we should do something about, but they don't feel we can solve it. And his solution, Chris de Meijer's solution, is that we should do less stories of climate concern and more stories of climate doing. So coming back to your balance, do more stories of climate doing and less stories of climate concern. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I share stories of climate doing, of climate action. So we need fewer alarming stories about the climate. There's plenty of urgency. And I think the disasters like the floods in middle Europe will always make the headlines anyway. So we need many more stories about climate action and fewer stories about climate itself.
Brilliant, thanks. So we are coming to the end of this. I have a couple of more questions to go, but and you talked about how do you get the majority to embrace climate action, not just the first wave. How do we speak the language of the majority?
Yes, so this comes back to my point about empathy. Yeah. It's very important to really understand and feel how these people think about the climate. And so we have this, on one side, we have this small group with a green belief system. And they firmly believe that we should all change the way we live completely. We should downsize, buy less, fly less. They're critical of capitalism and consumerism. And many of them think we should degrow. And they dominate the narrative on climate action. So mainstream audiences today have come to equate climate action with sacrifice, with major steps back in prosperity. And that's a problem because the large majority have a very different belief system. And the green group is great, but we need the majority, right? We know that 80% of the people are very concerned all around the world, all across Europe. But the problem is they will not vote for green left parties. So they have a very different belief system. They are politically moderate or conservative. They don't like big changes anyway. They love their habits. And they love consumption, business, technology, prosperity. So this is a completely different belief system from the first green group, let's say. Now, the green group strategy is to say to these people, your beliefs are wrong. You have to change your belief system. And if we all understood the seriousness of the issue, we should all switch to a green belief system. And so this is actually challenging the belief system of the majority. And what we know from psychological research is that challenging belief systems and values never works. It wouldn't work the other way around, would it? If we try to convince green people to start consuming, they would say, what are you doing? what's wrong with my beliefs, and who are you to tell me what to think and what to do? This works the other way around as well. So trying to change people's belief systems to a green belief system leads to reactance and to polarization, which is what we have now in many parts of the world. So if you want to win this majority, you have to fit the message to their belief system. So how can we do that for climate action? That's the key question in democracies today, I think, and it's central to my writings, to my columns. I think the majority needs a more politically neutral, positive narrative of progress. And this progress narrative is actually what I'm pushing with the readers of the Financial Daily, which is business leaders, politicians, NGOs. And it basically goes like this: wherever you stand politically, there's no sense in sticking to outdated, polluting technology or to yesterday's economy. The energy transition is simply progress. It makes our world cleaner, safer, and healthier. It's the next industrial revolution. We want to belong to the winners of that new economy as it creates new careers and prosperity for us all. So what I'm saying is that climate action is not what many people think it is. It is that it's about turning left or even about going back. It's moving forward. And most people agree that progress is a good thing. So if we frame climate action as progress, which is very true, it's not framing in the sense of promising something that it isn't. It is progress, that most people would agree that's a good thing. So that's actually the narrative that I'm pushing, this more politically neutral. It's not a leftist narrative, it's just a narrative about progress. It will make our lives better, all of our lives.
Very compelling and informative. So my last question, it's actually a yes or no question, but I'm not looking for a yes or a no, so maybe a little bit more insight into it. But and to tie it all together, can you change people's belief about climate change and the energy transition? I know you touched upon it and it's what the belief system, but what would be your answer to this one?
Well, I think we can, but only if we tell climate action stories. There's this ancient psychological principles, very well researched, and this is called consistency. As humans, we want our beliefs and our behavior to be consistent with one another, right? So we believe in what we do, and we do what we believe in. So if we are very concerned about the climate, which most people are, but we're not doing enough about it as a person, we are inconsistent. And so the principle of consistency means that we're always trying to close that gap between what we believe and what we're doing. If you believe that you cannot do it, you have to adjust your beliefs. And this is what's happening a lot of the time. So if we cannot change our behavior enough, we still have this huge inconsistency. And a way to change it is to say that because of the lack of agency, people just diminish the urgency of the issue. So there's consistency again. Climate change is not such a big thing. Some say it isn't even real. There's nothing I can do about it anyway. I just mind my daily business. I look away. So if you change your beliefs in that way, which I think we're seeing with many people, then there's consistency again, right? So they lessen the urgency because they don't see the agency. So what these people need is to get more sense of agency, and then they can also embrace the urgency again. They need stories of climate doing. And moderate and right-wing parties need a narrative that fits with their voters' belief system, this progress and growth narrative. So with my column, I try to stimulate that, and I hope my optimism and reframing is successful and contagious. There's another answer to this, and that's that I don't think it's always necessary to change people's belief system about the climate. All we have to do is change their behavior, right? So I give you an example of this. Everybody in Holland used to travel by plane or by car to Paris. That was the habit. Then came the fast speed train, the high speed train. which was called Thalys, now it's called Eurostar. And it takes you to Paris in 3 hours and 20 minutes, which is really just as fast as flying, much faster than by car and much more convenient. And it's a great train. It's very comfortable. It has Wi-Fi at the speed of 300 kilometers an hour, which I think is really incredible. There's food and drinks. There's plenty of leg room. You can charge your computer and your phone, and you can have conversations. So now everybody's taking this high-speed train to Paris. It's the standard. And only if you really have some special interest or problem, you might take the car or might take the plane. I don't think the belief systems of any of those people on the train have changed. And I don't think it's only green people that take that train. It's just easier and more attractive. So you don't need to change the belief system. You need to change the options, behavior options that people have. Same goes for electric vehicles. If electric vehicles are cheap and attractive, people can just choose them without changing their belief system. They can just continue to choose how they always choose. So the option that's most beneficial to themselves. And with that, they automatically help the transition. We always think that first we have to change belief systems and then the behavior will follow, but it's not always necessary. You can also influence behavior directly, like the Norwegian government has done. So there's all the cars that are sold there today are electric, with very few exceptions, just because they changed the system. And the electric vehicles are much more attractive than buying a combustion car. It's that simple. They don't have to change the belief system of Norwegian drivers. They just have to make electric more convenient than combustion, and the rest goes automatically.
Mm-hmm. Very informative. I look forward to see how we as a planet will succeed in moving forward. And you've certainly influenced the way I think about this in a very positive way. And so hopefully this podcast will also be able to influence our audience and they influence someone else. So with that, that will be the last words. So thanks a lot, Daan Remarque, for being a part of the podcast and allocating your precious time to talk to us. And we'll see you around, and we will do our best to influence people towards a better future.
Thank you for having me, Fridrik. It was my pleasure to be here.
All right, thank you.